All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Please go ahead and grab your seats. It is my pleasure to welcome our next panelists. I will be happy to introduce Professor Panos from the University of California Haas School of Business. This is a cross school and cross campus collaboration, and we're very, very happy to have you. So, handing it over to you, Panos.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Panos Patatoukas. I'm a professor at Berkeley Haas in accounting and finance, and I'm co-leading the Sustainable and Impact Finance Initiative at Haas, as well as the Center for Financial Reporting and Management. It is my pleasure to welcome our panelists. Investors are asking for relevant, reliable, verifiable data that they can actually trust to use and to make investment decisions. I got interested in sustainability reporting a few years ago. I've been at Haas since 2010, but it's only a few years ago that my MBA students, because I did it in the MBA program, started asking for ways in my class on financial data analysis to integrate sustainability data about the sustainability activities of corporations, alongside traditional financial data to make better decisions, to better understand the fundamentals of individual companies, but also to build portfolios and indices. So that's really got me interested a few years ago to dive deeper into the technical aspects of sustainability reporting and the ways investors can use the data to make better decisions. So in that background, with that in the backdrop, I want to introduce our panel. Actually, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves. So let's kick off with a very quick round of introductions.
Hi, I'm Verity Chager. I'm a board member of the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB for short. And my quick bio is that previously I was on the buy side. So I was an investor struggling for data, high quality data to make investment decisions, both in traditional portfolio management as well as working with teams across BlackRock's active management teams, as well as their investment stewardship teams, to think about how to make capital allocation decisions on this data, and how to engage corporate directors, what risks to engage them about, and then also working with California State Teachers Retirement System as well, and in thinking about their policy, how to manage their total portfolio, multi-asset portfolio, and reach their net zero ambition. I should also mention that previously I was a board member of the SASB Standards Board as well. So I helped develop those industry-specific standards, which are now part of the ISSB's materials, and we now incorporate them into the ISSB standards and have responsibility for maintaining and enhancing them.
Well, Verity, welcome back to Berkeley. This is actually the second time I see Verity within 1 week. We actually, we beat a little bit Berkeley law. We had our conference last week on sustainability investment and reporting. And hopefully, Stavro, next year we're going to coordinate, because this is really, truly, and the interdisciplinary problem, right? And that makes it really exciting, right? It's not just accounting, finance, operations, law. It's all disciplines truly coming together. So I think the time is ripe to move from analysis to synthesis.
That's a good way to put it. Time is right, from analysis to synthesis. I'm Roshali Gaud. I'm the global director at Google, leading some of our net zero strategy, clean energy, carbon reduction across the company and its value chain. Super excited to be here, so thank you. Quick bio, I started my career as an automotive engineer, building and selling diesel engines and cars. It's a very karmic to have come the full circle. And then from there, got interested in sustainability, saw the interlock of sustainability and business, moved into the policy side a little bit, worked with the International Integrated Reporting Council, which is now part of the ISSB, and did that, and then moved into consulting. Prior to Google, I helped build Accenture's sustainability practice. So super excited to have this conversation, having seen it go through the policy, corporate, consulting and corporate side now. Thank you.
Welcome to Berkeley. And Cesar, I saw you last week as well, though very, very briefly. So great to spend time with you on this panel.
It's great to be back here. So thank you for having me. So Cesar Lucchesi, I lead the net zero transition practice for Accenture in North America. My background is mostly in utilities, so I spent most of my career working in establishing electricity markets, energy balancing markets, a lot of time on asset investment planning, like network resilience, vegetation management, so all things related to the the impact of integrating renewables generation into the grid, but also how to make the grid more resilient to be able to support the energy transition. So my focus since taking on the role last year has been very much to demonstrate that net zero transition is good for business, right? It's not only about sustainability. It's not only about climate change, but it's also, if the companies are not looking at it from a business lens, they are missing the boat.
So I guess we're past the point of whether companies should disclose. We're at the point where people are trying to understand how to disclose. So I guess, preparing for today's panel, I was thinking of, the questions should be a bit more practical so that people can take away some, what's really happening in practice, right? I think, Cesar, I want to start with you perhaps. And, talking to your clients, what are the primary challenges and opportunities your clients are facing as they're preparing to measure more and better ways to measure their data? What are the challenges and opportunities they're facing as they're building their sustainability reporting capabilities so that they can provide verifiable data that people can actually trust? And do you actually see those challenges vary across firms depending on their sector and also their scale of the operations of the individual firms?
Absolutely, and also there's a different order of magnitude in terms of the investment required compared to the revenue of the company as well. So you see for certain companies it's less of an investment to be able to do this properly, whereas for others, especially the smaller ones, it might be something very costly. But yes, it varies a lot depending on the companies. And I think the challenges we see is, first of all, you need to understand what data is important to you, right? So that would allow you to define the policies and be able to understand what you want to measure. Then you need to have the right structure to be able to implement those policies and have the implementation plans for those. And then once you have that in place, you can actually measure effectively, right? That's something that we, spending a lot of my time in the utilities industry, it's not that different in terms of how they had over the years, how utilities had to adapt their reporting structures to the regulators to be able to provide more accurate data, right? And they had to do that in a systematic way. They had to do that in a way that they weren't over-investing either to be able to generate these reports. So, but other industries, they are less data intensive. You see more of a struggle for that. But typically what you see is like you do this in 3 stages: setting up policies, setting up the implementation plan, and then measuring effectively and reporting.
And what about variation within sectors across firms of different scale? What are the unique challenges you see, for example, when you deal with small and medium-sized companies comparing to kind of big or mega capitalization corporations? Mm-hmm. What are the unique ways that you approach those clients?
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, it comes from the investments already made in systems and technology that allows them to capture the data more easily, right? And you'll be surprised the amount of companies that still have very manual processes and using paper for a lot of things. And for those, it's much harder to be able to even capture the data. So, and there's a reason why they didn't make those investments in the past, is because they're costly, and they felt like at that scale was easier for them, but it was okay for them to continue doing manual things. But over time, they're going to have to automate a lot of this. So, because otherwise it would be very hard for them to capture and disclose the data.
And in terms of the automation, do you see technology like AI accelerating that path to automation,
yes,
kind of driving the cost down, especially for the smaller companies?
Absolutely.
I might be asking obvious questions, right? Or leading questions. But.
No, sorry. It's my background, a lot of my background is in technology, so I try to avoid talking about technology as much as I can.
That's why I asked this question.
Yeah. So yes, a lot of the big companies who have already been investing a ton in AI, they are able to leverage their AI, investments to generate more accurate reports, right? So we have some studies that shows that out of the companies that provide the most accurate reports, at 60% plus of them use some sort of AI to generate those reports. So it allows you to cross-reference data across multiple sources and feel more confident that what you're putting forward is the correct data. So yes, definitely AI. And with Gen AI becoming more of a reality as well, you see more and more of that.
Fantastic. So, Rosalie, before I ask my real question, which is what are the challenges and opportunities in the sustainability reporting of Alphabet, I want to ask you the question that comes before that, which is how do you feel transitioning from Accenture to Alphabet within the span of the last few months? What do you wish you knew prior to joining Google, or what do you wish you knew at Accenture?
Are you under an NDA?
Yeah, right. And you can give all the disclaimers, right?
Thank you. Great question. I'll still use my consulting lens and say like 3 points. Everything is 3 in consulting.
It was 7.
There you go. So there were a couple things that got reinforced when you go from a sort of a policy consulting background to corporate, and then there were a few surprises. So things that I think you get reinforced is building on what he was saying is it's very transformative when you start operationalizing some of these changes. You realize, one, I think sustainability climate is a team sport. You know, it's not just one group of people with certain titles who lead it. It's embedded throughout the organization, as rightfully it should be. Some of them have this as their full-time roles. The others sort of have stackable portions of their roles that do this. So to me, that was very kind of illuminating, and just understanding how, you're in the university, you talk about teaching, you talk about academics, like how much of the skill set needs to be embedded within the organization. That was one. I think the second is, coming from a technology consulting to a technology company, it seems a little biased, but technology does seem to be at the heart of all of this, and in multiple different ways. One is, of course, the data and the reporting and the disclosures and the quality and the technology enablement of it. But if you start seeing even from driving change, you're looking at new technologies, clean technologies, IoT, you're looking at improvements in materials. All of that is sort of a huge change in sort of transitioning a technology piece of it. So that was a big piece. The surprise was, for me personally, was it's sort of harder than you think, but more rewarding than you can imagine. So it is hard because you're driving change across company, and especially if you look at Alphabet, right? It's got its own operations. We have a significant value chain. It's a global company, and that's the size of it is pretty sizable and it's challenging. But if you get it right, and even if you make smaller changes, the amount of systems impact it can have is very rewarding. So that was a big surprise for me.
And in this new role of yours, right? What do you see as kind of the primary challenges, and also kind of you mentioned the potential of impact as something that motivates you, right? But what do you think is the kind of the massive opportunities for impact with respect to the measurement, reporting, and verification systems at Alphabet?
I think So Alphabet, Google has been reporting on this voluntarily for a long time. So I think when you were mentioning companies on a different spectrum, probably a little ahead, having sort of put this out and reported on these metrics for a long time. But the challenge still is, for I think any company out there, is the data, the granularity of the data, the quality, fidelity, the depth of which you need across your operations. But then you start talking about your supply chain. So I think just getting that information in the right cadence to the right people for report and decisions is, I think, still, it's an evolving door. It's an evolving goal for us. So that's number one. I think the second one is getting some of the, which I think, Verity, you can talk about a little bit, is the methodologies and the frameworks and sort of the policy around it, the regulations. Alignment on that, I think, will go a long way for a lot of companies. So that's a big piece. And the third piece is, once you have all of this, how do you actually drive impact? So for us, for example, clean energy is a big part of it. How do you drive the right 24/7 carbon-free energy? Or how do you drive effective use of data centers? How do you drive our products to make the right, inform consumers the right way? So I think that's the next piece of this, is the challenge of using all that data that you measure in the right format.
Interesting. So we'll go back to the data processes and the specifics of measurement. But before that, let's talk about the ISSB and the push towards kind of a global baseline of sustainability reporting. And what's the role of the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, in terms of facilitating companies across sectors and of different scale in their sustainability reporting journey?
So a few of the answers, points for this answer have been echoed by earlier panelists, which I'm very glad to see that people are recognizing sort of a role for a single global baseline to prevent this pain that companies will otherwise experience in terms of having to do something unique for a jurisdiction for that one single plant or office or kind of subsidiary that's in a certain spot. But companies really want to be able to do sort of a high-level view of their operations, think about the holistic level of risks and opportunities that are relevant for their business, and then provide information about that total business at the global level. And that's exactly what investors want. And investors who are sitting in the US have a global portfolio of companies in Canada and Japan and Germany, and they want to be able to compare information across all those different companies, no matter where their headquarters are, no matter where their subsidiaries are. And so this comparability, this consistency, this decision useful information is why the ISSB was formed, and formed with a mission to really consolidate or rationalize a number of the voluntary efforts. So, for example, when we issued our two standards, our general requirement standard, what we call S1, which has a lot of the nuts and bolts and conceptual foundation elements, things like the reporting entity that discloses sustainability information should be the same reporting entity that produces the financial statements, because investors want to compare financial performance to sustainability risks and opportunities. Those things are connected. Also, investor materiality is driving the decisions, because what is meaningful for a business, and we're not talking about a single quantitative threshold, but really what's going to drive the business's ability to generate cash flows over the short, medium, and long term, really what we call to sustain the business over a long term, is relevant not only for investors, but also for the executives running that business and the directors leading that business. I think hopefully we'll talk a little bit about corporate governance. So rationalizing these investor-focused initiatives, the TCFD is fully incorporated into S1 and S2, our two standards. SASB standards are baked into S1 and S2. We require industry-specific information because that's efficient for companies and useful for investors. And we're also bringing in a lot of consolidating ability for companies who are preparing these reports for capital markets, for investors, lenders, and other creditors to be able to use metrics and data points from SASB standards. Also, because CSRD is a real thing, using data points they might be preparing for ESRS that they find are also useful for their investors. Likewise, some companies have been reporting to GRI, so we allowed, if there's a metric you've been developing using GRI, for example, to their greenhouse gas emission standard, we are going to show you how to connect the dots, how close you are to being ready for the climate standard for investor-focused delivery of information. We're rationalizing this space in order to make it more efficient for companies and ultimately more useful for the global capital markets.
So think of a company that is in the process of adapting S1 and S2, right? So what are the kind of investments they need to make in human capital and technology in terms of developing the expertise and capacity for sustainability reporting? What would you advise them?
Yeah, so I heard somebody earlier talk about sort of financial reporting and non-financial reporting, and I think one thing that's really a key message here is that sustainability information is driving investment decisions, and therefore it is financial related. That's why we titled our S1 General Requirement Standard Sustainability Related Financial Disclosures, because it's about what goes in the general purpose financial report, that annual report, if you like. And now we see with the SEC rule that statutory regulatory filing is now requiring this information to be put in that annual report. Similarly with S1, S2, what we're talking about here is bringing the rigor of accounting to sustainability information, and it's elevating what that means. Having that investor focus means you need to think about internally how you're organizing your business to have the right people, the right strategic level of thinkers oversee this collection and reporting of data. So you're talking about the same internal controls team that develops your financial statements. It's the CEO, CFO signing off on this, but you also need your general counsel, CLO. You need your chief risk officer. You need also your chief sustainability officer, because these people are all going to be working together to make sure that you're thinking holistically about risks and opportunities about this variable time horizon, not just the trailing 12 months, but your next 30 years.
Yeah, and that came also up last week in our conference at Berkeley House, where sustainability officers mentioning that the time of them being siloed from the rest of the organization these days are over. Everybody has to work with each other to really make this happen. So Vishali, we briefly talked about human capital, right? So how important is kind of human capital investments, within the context of Alphabet, right? So now you're wearing your Alphabet hat. So how important are these investments in terms of developing the capacity and expertise and realizing your vision in terms of your sustainability path?
No, it's tremendously important, and it's the same when you talk of transformation, right? It's like process, people, and technology, right? So people are the heart of it. And I'll build off of something which you mentioned, Verity, is this was traditionally considered non-financial, voluntary, siloed. You're bringing it into a business lens. So everything that you thought about from a financial lens and how a business process should run, now you want to put that in, which means you need finance organizations who understand GHG protocols, who understands all of these new standards, how these different metrics work for carbon, water, which are very different from traditional finance metrics, but equally now need the same fidelity, process control. You have the same thing with the legal departments. You have, similarly, when you start operationalizing this, you're looking at energy procurement folks who require clean energy backgrounds, renewable energy backgrounds, reporting that requires a different lens. So if you take every piece of a business process, you either need sustainability experts, or I'm going to use the word sustainability broadly, but you could call them climate, you could call them ESG, which word resonates. But you also need traditional skill sets that have to be embellished. So you could, and I think that's the big part, operational teams who understand, why are we recording carbon data again? Why are we recording energy data again? What's the end purpose of this? I think building that awareness is super critical to actually then get the right quality of information, right fidelity of it. So that's just from a data reporting perspective. You start looking at decisions. Once you start getting these metrics and you're embedding those into your decisions around the business, whether it's product decisions, whether it's driving material of devices, or what you're doing with construction, or how you're procuring energy in different parts of the world. Those are, again, skill sets that you have to build in your traditional departments to then influence that change. And from a Google perspective, it's twofold, right? How do we build that capability with the existing skill sets? I think it's same for Accenture too, is how do you build your existing workforce and elevate them? And then how do you, when you're hiring, find the right combination, which I think universities are doing a great job, is the right mix of degrees, business plus environmental or sustainability, to get into that. I will say this, and I've said this before, seen this in every role. If you ask an incoming batch of graduates what's the number one thing they want to work for, I think AI might have shifted that a little bit now, but sustainability, climate change used to be on top of everyone's list. Everybody wants to get into the space, be part of something meaningful. So it's a good opportunity.
I mean, for us as academics, it's a good opportunity to listen to what's happening inside the organizations in terms of the way we develop curriculum and the way we adapt and train the future generation of leaders, right? So hopefully, we're going to be working more closely with all of you. So Cesar, what are the investments you advise your clients to do in terms of developing the capacity and expertise? And what are the conversations you're hearing? What are the reactions?
So you mean investments in
people and technology.
People and technology, yeah. I think it goes back to understanding their priorities, right? And one of the key things, and Roshali touched on that, is you need to embed, given everything we're talking about here, you need to embed sustainability in everything you do. It's not let's set up this part of the organization that they know everything about the topic and they're going to now help all of us be more sustainable, right? So it is about understanding not only what's required to be able to report accurately, but also what's required to be able to reduce your carbon emissions, right? So at the minute you start, and it's going to be a requirement now, and people are going to start looking into it, not only investors, but also the large consumers, right? They're going to start looking at those reports and say, okay, now I can compare these two providers, and I may decide to choose the one that's more sustainable, right? Which we're already seeing that happening. So therefore, I think going to the heart of the question, so the recommendation is normally understand the impact that your GHG emissions are going to have on your business from a revenue protection perspective and be able to capture new revenue, and also what's required to reduce those emissions and how you can leverage what's available in the market in terms of funding to help you improve business performance, right? So it's probably a long way to answer the question, but in the most traditional consulting response, it depends, right? But ultimately, if you understand that this is not all about compliance, this is about good business decisions, then understand the impact that being more sustainable will have to your business and focus on the more material part of it.
I mean, even the data, right? So we see a strong correlation between carbon efficiency, but other aspects of operating efficiency, right? So the two are tied with each other, which leads me to the next set of questions related to, the impact of sustainability reporting on real aspects of economic activity, the operations of the firm, the corporate governance of the firm, and the strategy of the firm, and kind of the interactions across all of this. So back to you. So how do you think corporate strategy is impacting sustainability reporting choices? How sustainability reporting choices are impacting corporate strategy? And is this a two-way link? What's the loop?
Absolutely. Well, you could say that they are merging into one of the same, right? I'll give an example similar to what the previous speaker was talking about. So the insurance, the large insurance left California because of climate risk, and all the wildfires. Now the government is trying to find ways of bringing them back, right? And finding ways of being more precise on how we assess risk of wildfire and to be able to now bring companies back. So unless you do understand, if you have the data to be able to support your investment decisions, and you do understand how sustainability is going to have an impact on your business, you won't be making the right investment decisions, right? Because, and it's the same thing with utilities, it's the same thing with mining companies. I do a lot of work with mining companies as well. It needs to be the same, because being more energy efficient, for example, has a huge implication, cost reduction, improve your profitability, right? Likewise, being more energy efficient also, using a mining example, being more energy efficient also helps you with production throughputs, because it has a direct correlation with asset performance, right? So it's good to be energy efficient. There's money available in the market to help you be more energy efficient. So you should take advantage of that and bring together corporate strategy and sustainability strategy to deliver better business outcomes.
So from strategy, let's move on to governance, right? And of course, the two are related. So Verity, for you, so how do you think the corporate governance of an organization adapts with the adoption of sustainability reporting standards?
Well, big reason we focus on materiality in the traditional sense, which is that information is material if misstated, omitted, or obscured would reasonably make a difference to an investor in that decision. That's a high bar. That's a bar so high that if you are missing that information, it could likely mean the difference between a huge bump in your stock, a huge long-term ownership and position in your stock, or a structural revaluation of your stock. And that is such a high bar that it's also the same level of importance that should be driving manager decisions, right? So even though in our climate standard we ask about specific detailed information about how the board of directors is overseeing climate risk considerations, which managers and who are thinking about the day-to-day operations of that and involved in monitoring risks over time, all these bodies or individuals. That's important information to know. If there's sort of executive remuneration tied to any of the climate targets that the company set, that's a difference between what that company leader is going to drive the business toward or maybe away from. That's all relevant information to investors, but it's also the same information that is so important, it ought to rise to the level of the directors on boards, who are, by the way, held accountable by these investors. So it should be the strategic long-term direction of the company that is focused on the key drivers, the drivers of the business, understanding resilience to climate and what sort of data and assumptions got put into the scenario analysis that the company did, and being able to explain that in a way that says, okay, now you know you're resilient to your assumptions on climate this way, then you need to know what is your strategy for managing that. And so all of this ought to be happening at the leadership level, the board of directors, the executive management, in order to drive all of the business decisions. And that's why we've got this TCFD structure baked into our standards, not only for climate, but also for all sustainability related risks and opportunities that are relevant for the business.
So for you, do you think that the way companies collect the data and report the data can actually impact the way they operate? And I think I know the answer to that, but what's your perspective?
In terms of the governance, a little bit?
I mean, transcending governance and transcending strategy, right? So, what we measure is what we treasure, right? So does measurement impact real activities? And you can think of kind of the traditional business activities, the way companies operate, the way companies invest, the way companies finance those investments. Do you see kind of a path to a real transformation?
There has to be. There has to be, right? I think the answer is yes. Now, again, it's a journey, is what I'll say. It's harder than you think, is what I've come to.
So how do you make it happen?
Yeah, and I'll build a little bit of what you said, like in terms of just the building on the governance, and what I think we've done at Google is just how do you also structure the teams? How do you structure the controls on it? We are a central team, but we have almost every other function working on this. We have a board accountability on this. And so what that does is going to your point is you're not just measuring, you're actually embedding it within the organization so that people start thinking about it when they do their day-to-day activity and they start operationalizing it. I can speak from a Google perspective, like the number one thing we've seen, the transformation for us has been on energy. And that's, if you think about scope 1 and 2, it's your own operational footprint, energy is at the heart of it. So how do we, transition to a 24/7 carbon-free energy, right? And that's a very operational transformation piece. And it's linked with your ability to measure very effectively what you're using, what your footprint is, your ability to then go into the market and drive the change that's required to get that clean energy. It's linked with the ability to use it effectively off the grid in different regions that you operate. So that's a business transformation. That's not purely for reporting. That's not purely for compliance. It actually had nothing to do with that. It was before the regulations came on board, right? And so to me, that's a good example of a business transformation in there. And so I think if you just extend that and you extend that into any part of the business that you're looking at, whether it's some of the products we drive, right? Google Maps, Geo, Google Cloud, how do you start using that and adding an element of a product feature around sustainability or climate? And whether it's an offering in terms of a tool, whether it's an offering in terms of an option in the product, but to me, that's a business transformation, because now you've made it part of a business strategy that drives a product that drives, ultimately outcomes for the consumer. So,
can I jump on this? Because I think you're raising so many important points about how the history of sustainability reporting has been maybe a scattershot of indicators that were possible to measure, possible to report, rather than truly integrated into what the long-term business opportunities for that company were. And so now, with sort of this regulatory reporting requirements coming up, you're experiencing and notice, or we're all seeing some effect that someone earlier called green hushing, where companies are kind of pulling back on the number of indicators that are out there in the world in the reports in order to really rationalize and make sure they're focusing on what is related to the business, what will be a driver for the business, and therefore what really does rise to the level of these investor-oriented disclosures, these regulatory requirements. Not every possible indicator, but really what matters.
And I think it goes back to what you said. It's a good, you're seeing the big circle come around. You had a strategy, You operationalize it, you report it. You were reporting a lot of things, but now you're being much more targeted. And the more targeted you are in your reporting, it'll feed back into driving the right strategy and operations. So I think we're like now at that kind of right junction. I see you nodding. You're right at junction of driving that back.
So, Cesar, so what are the changes that you would advise your clients to do to their corporate governance structure so that they successfully adopt their sustainability reporting frameworks and measurements? And it goes back a little bit to Verity's points, right, in terms of quotes. And,
That's what I'm gonna say. I think we covered most of the things. I think we're seeing more and more this being discussed at board level in companies, right? So boards are adapting to be able to interpret better what ESG reporting or sustainability reporting and what the sustainability metrics means to the business, from a risk and compliance, from a compensation, like tying bonuses to sustainability targets, right? So it's been it's more and more you see that embedded in companies who are taking this seriously and understand that this is more than just a requirement, right? This is good for business, and they need to adapt to be able to do it.
To your experience interacting with your clients, what's the frequency at which you see companies adapting environmental metrics as part of the compensation, relative performance and valuation systems that they have in place?
Yeah, it's probably not as much as it should be, right? But when you move away from pure sustainability metrics and you talk about climate risk, then you see that happening more often, right? It's because it becomes a matter of reducing the operational risk for that company, and it's easier for you to go after the COO and say, it's your job to reduce the operational risk, out of which part of it is climate risk. Same to the CFO, same to the CEO. So we're seeing more and more of that. I think the SEC ruling will have a bigger impact in the sense that it's going to increase awareness that this is important and investors are looking into this. But it needs to move faster, probably.
I have wearing my old stewardship hat, from the asset management side and asset owner side, I think you have to be really careful about which kind of, ESG metrics are baked into executive management in order to make sure they're actually tied to the business, tied to the long-term strategy, and not just an easy win to get a nice short-term bonus. So, understanding what those metrics are, understanding if they're rigorous or not is really important. And that's why it takes, good analysis and transparency to understand exactly how much comp is at risk based on that metric.
And those metrics need to be verifiable. Well, leads me to my next question related to assurance. Because investors are asking for more information that can be used to make benchmarking exercises, compare the same firm over time, but also across its sector peers. But also investors are asking for data that they can trust, data that is verifiable. So Verity, I have a question for you. How reasonable do you think it is to expect reasonable assurance for sustainability-related information, right? How far away do you think we are in terms of a convergence in the degree of assurance that we would expect for financial data vis-a-vis sustainability data?
Is anybody from the Big Four in the audience who has a stat about the level of assurance today? Because I wish I had that number handy. Somebody? No? I mean, I know there is already some assurance being done for greenhouse gas emissions. Usually it's those metrics. And so I think there's a certain level of comfort. At the same time, the climate risk reporting, transition risk, climate resilience, scenario analysis, the discussion about the strategy to manage those risks, the discussion about risk monitoring and the setting of targets and the metrics to achieve them, all of this is way beyond the sort of current level of the practice of assurance of climate-related metrics today in the market today. So I think what I'm hearing from the international audit and assurance community is that they, as a global industry, collectively agree to build capacity in that profession in order to be better partners to their corporate clients, because they really have to dig in to learn new things about scenario analysis and other things that are now outside of their traditional line of expertise in auditing financial statements. So that is happening. There are lots of good efforts going on right now, and no surprise, there's a standard for that. So there's this other body called the International Audit and Assurance Standards Board, which sets standards, IAASB for short. They set standards for the profession, the international audit profession, in order to conduct high-quality audit practices with their clients, making sure that they're following rigorous practices as an international profession in order to build trust in capital markets, to build trust in these numbers that get published. So that's happening. They're nearly ready to publish their latest and greatest sustainability assurance standard. I think it's 5,000 and numbered 5,000. So the profession has been using the 3,000 standard, which has been pretty good, but they are working hard to get ready and prepare and upskill to be more useful partners over time.
So do you think there should be a dichotomy between those third-party providers that attest on the quality of the financial statements and those who provide attestation on the sustainability reports? Should it be the same company, or should it be a separation?
I personally don't have a view on that. I don't know if you do.
Yes, typically would have the person marking the homework a different person from the one doing the homework, right? So yeah, I think that's an evolution of the regulation will probably get there and separate the two things. So.
When you're talking about connected information and building those bridges, I think, you know, some lines will start to blur. We'll see.
Sorry.
CapEx planning, any kind of notes to financial statements related to CapEx plans in order to provide a strategy to be, you know, shoring up and executing your climate resilience plans, things like that.
Yeah, I mean the assurance part, right? So it's the more. I'm no expert on this topic, by the way, but I'll provide my opinion. The assurance part, I see that evolving more towards, you know, the more auditing perspective, right? But you're going to have companies helping capture the data, changing the processes to capture data more accurately, and preparing the solutions that will provide that data that will then be used for the investment decisions. And typically, I would expect, as you see in other parts of, you know, you typically don't see the audit company also providing consulting services, right? I can see it evolving to something similar because of issues that happened in the past when you had the same company doing both things. So.
But we also have these new professions internally at companies, ESG controllers, ESG counsel. Somebody said earlier, there's just more and more expertise in-house at, you know, larger listed, well-resourced companies.
So, Rochelle, what do you think? Because you also used to be at PwC, right? Among other things.
Yeah. I'm going to pause and think about this a little bit because I think it goes back to you already have those boundaries, right? What audit versus advisory, you know, audit readiness versus actually conducting the audit. And most good companies, you know, big companies understand that both on the corporate side as well as from the consulting side, that those are the boundaries and that's how you kind of, you know, how do you manage those? So I think going back to what Sridhar says, it'll get more clear as more and more of this information gets regulated and audited. Those boundaries will become more clear and we'll see more progress on that. But it'll follow the same lens as what we had for financial reporting, where I think that's probably where we'll, you know, go. And within the companies, again, you do have roles like ESG controller. You're having some of those titles now come in where there's more specific granular understanding of roles and responsibilities and how they fall and the merging of the two. So that's what I'll say.
So very, you know, within the context of ISSB, the integration of financial reporting and sustainability reporting is key, right? So I guess my question is for you, first of all. You know, dealing with your clients, right? So what are the, you know, which clients are better in terms of achieving that integration?
Do you want names? Yeah.
No, it's like, you know, just characteristics, right? You know, where do you see the biggest challenges, but also, you know, which ones are better, and what are the tangible benefits from that integration of financial reporting and sustainability reporting?
So when I'm normally talking about this with clients and even internally within Accenture. I talk about like the different pressures that drive people to invest in that space, right? And there is a clear regulatory pressure, there's investor pressure, but the one I see the most moving the needle is the consumer pressure, and not necessarily us consumers, but like large corporations putting pressure on their suppliers to move the needle, right? So the companies who are being more effective that I see so far in getting better at this are the companies that are suffering consumer pressure. And because they see that as an opportunity, now it's kind of pretty much protect revenue approach, right? So I'm not going to get the business from Apple. I'm not going to get the business from Google if I don't do a better job in putting the rigor required to merge the two things. But I think very soon, and I think the SEC ruling has an impact on that, I see them seeing as an opportunity to capture bigger markets, right? Either in the US or abroad, given all the constraints you have in Europe and other places that are coming up. So hopefully I answered the question. I tried to be a bit vague, but companies that are suffering harder consumer pressure, that's where I see the most effectiveness at the minute.
So you're just kind of business-to-business relations.
That's correct, yes.
And where you have downstream customers, businesses, putting pressure on their dependent suppliers, right, to change. Is this suffering, or is this an opportunity to grow?
Right now, I think in a lot of cases, it's seen as revenue protection. But that's it. The mindset is changing to, okay, I have to do this better, and I have to demonstrate that I'm moving the needle here. My competitors, if they do it quicker than me, they're going to have the competitive advantage. But if I'm quicker than them, I'm going to have the competitive advantage. So yes, it's both.
So Rosali, you mentioned before the value chain approach at Google, right? So what do you see upstream, your value chain? And do you see any of that happening in the context of Alphabet?
Yeah, I think just taking a kind of a step back from there, it's your classic carrot and stick approach, right? In some places, the carrot works, which is sort of, it's revenue enhancing, it's an opportunity. In some cases, it's a stick because it's a requirement, it's a compliance requirement, or it's a B2B mandate from your consumers or your customers. And I think it doesn't matter. As long as it's one or the other or both, it's great. It's because it's moving the needle, right? So just broadly speaking, all of those are very important levers. In the case of Google Alphabet, I think it's a combination, right? One, you do see a broader consumer customer viewpoint of that, where there is demand. There's a demand for information. There's demand for action, and we sort of believe in that. I also feel, and I think Google strongly believes that companies the size of Google play a role in sort of driving some of this change, and so take a more stronger position and kind of contribute to policy making, advocacy, and so forth, which then drives change across the value chain. And then you're part of somebody else's value chain, and you're influencing your own. And we do that both ways. One is, like I was talking about, the products and services we do, but then also working with our suppliers, engaging with them, understanding where their roadblocks are and what we can work and solve effectively. And having a good business and material lens on that also helps. So yes, I would say carrot and stick, very useful. Find the hotspots across the value chain within your operations and kind of focus on that. All of those has been useful.
But that sounds more kind of a coordination along the value chain as opposed to just pure extraction of value, right?
Oh, definitely. I don't like the term extraction of value.
That's why. Yeah, collaboration is
yes,
the one
yes.
I'm emphasizing. Yeah.
So it's almost like you're helping elevate, right? So you are collaborating, but you're also enabling, and that every supplier, every value chain has their constraints depending on what they are, where they are, whether it's tier 1, and then you go down to tier 2, tier 3, it gets even more complex. So how do you be the enabler for the change, I think, is a bigger role to play. And that could be effectively, engaging with them, working with them on the products, finding what issues are, bringing collaborations together. So, working with your peers to kind of work across suppliers. I think all of that would be. And at the end of the day, the value you create for them is also the value that comes back to you. So that's the double sort of benefit of it.
So, we have 10 minutes left, and there's been a lot of discussion about regulation, how dynamic the regulatory environment is, from the SEC final rules to California state rules, all the way to the European Union, right? So, Verity, I have a question for you. And again, it's an obvious one, but I think it's an important one. How does the ISSB and the interoperability aspect of the ISSB can facilitate the sustainability reporting journey of companies operating across different parts of the world?
Many of the earlier panelists have done a good job painting the picture that if you think you can just go to sleep and not pay attention, then you're not reading the tea leaves here. So, companies that are doing business in California have to think about scope 3 because it's in 253, even though it's not in the SEC rule. But companies that are also part of the value chain of companies in Europe, or if they are subject to CSRD through non-European reporting coverage, extraterritoriality, they're also going to have to think about something like scope 3. And then scope 3 is, of course, up and down the value chain. And if you have a supplier or if you have a customer, then you are also somebody else's scope 3. And so that you've got this kind of knock-on effect. What we're really working hard to do is make sure that we have strong alignment. And I think what you saw out of the SEC rule, although some people have been disappointed, really what you saw was a focus on the TCFD architecture that is globally embraced by both companies and investors as useful. So that's in the SEC rule. That's, I think, a really positive sign. That's in our S2 climate standard as well. You also see the elements, they're not in the same order, but they're in there in the CSRD standards as well in a different organization, but they're there. So I think the CEO and chairman of Bank of America, Brian Moynihan, said it best at our symposium in New York last February. He said, ISSB standards, disclosing and reporting to ISSB standards is a no regrets strategy. Because if you are preparing information at that high investor grade quality with all of the internal controls organization that it needs and the audit trail and the important organization internally, getting that information that's focusing on what is business relevant, focusing on the TCFD architecture, focusing on industry specific information, which is required in our standards, then you are ready. You're getting ready for California, for SEC, for CSRD, and you are spending your time wisely. Things like bringing sustainability reporting to the annual fiscal financial reporting cycle is a huge lift for companies to reorganize their internal data controls and systems and processes, just who gets together when on the calendar in order to be able to deliver that annual report is a big shift. And this is all something that you can get organized and get ready to do with ISSB standards.
At Google, right? So, you're operating at different regimes, different parts of the world, and, probably you're exposed to different regulations. So how do you prepare for compliance across all these different regimes? How do you think about efficiency in terms of the data processes that need to be in place to collect, curate, aggregate, disseminate, disclose data that is relevant, reliable, verifiable, that investors will love? So how do you think about that?
Got a lot of good words in that question. So I think and there's an amazing team at Google that works on compliance, reporting, regulations. So I would sort of in the right way defer this to them a little bit more. But I'll say this, having been in the space for a while and also at Google, at the heart of it is there are some basic elements of data that is common across everything, right? So you could focus on the complexity, or you could simplify it and think about, I need these foundational pieces aligned. I need this information, to be really granular, for the right fidelity and the right quality. And then everything else is a function of that, right? So it's a thing to do with some of the metrics. I'm going to take the one which is most common, right? So carbon metrics, scope 1 and 2 and 3, which is more complex and nascent at this point. But once you have that, then whether you're reporting into an SEC framework or an ISSB or CSRD, irrespective of which company is looking at it, it becomes easier. So to me, the focus should be on getting your foundational data and the structures and the single source of truth really correct. And once you have that, everything then can build off of that, which it sort of makes it less enormous of a challenge. I will also then add that, having been in the policy space and the regulatory space before, is there is something to be said about more alignment. And if globally there can be more alignment on that, and we could have fewer acronyms, I think that would be good for everybody and every company overall. But the focus should be on simplifying and not let sort of perfect be the enemy of good. If you have good enough data, you have good enough reporting structures, you can start there and build off of that.
Fantastic. So we have a couple of minutes left. So I guess I have a high-level question for all of you, the same. Starting with you, Verity. So how do you envision the future of corporate sustainability measurement and reporting? That's one part. And the second part, how do we at Berkeley prepare our students for this future?
Okay. Well, I would like all of her dreams to come true. Simplification, harmonization. I think that's good for capital markets. It's definitely good for companies to focus on actually making those changes, not just spending all of their time and resources reporting on the risks, but actually mitigating the risks, managing the risks, and generating value, storing value. And then that's ultimately good for investors like the teachers in California State Teacher Retirement System, who will be needing the benefit of those good decisions in 30 years. What your students can do, and today is what you can do for your students is, I think, continue to sort of think locally, but also, horizon scan here globally, because something like climate doesn't have political borders. And I think increasingly when we're thinking about global business, of course, global investors, these sort of political boundaries around these decisions and requirements in terms of disclosure and reporting and action are limiting. And we really need to start thinking with more coordination and keeping this system more simple and more international.
It's a fantastic question because as I've built teams and recruited, there's so much young talent coming into the space. It's phenomenal. I wish we could find a way to energize all of them and use their skills effectively if every company could. I think there's two sides of this. One, in terms of what the students and the skill sets, I think being really thoughtful about what is material to the sectors you're going to work in, what is material to the companies you want to go look for and work for, and building that skill set along with the broader business or broader degrees that you are getting. So I think there's a nuance here of, do you become a sustainability expert or do you become a lawyer with a sustainability background or a sustainability add-on? So those are interesting nuances to think through. I think which we've just scratched the surface. As this grows, you'll start seeing that expertise built in. And from what an academic, what you can do for the students, I think is also provide that sense of agility. I think this is an evolving field. In my 20 years in this space versus the last 2 years, there's been so much that happened in the last couple of years than before, right? And so just building that sense of being agile and adapt in this is a very big skill set I think these students can use. And if the schools can prepare them with that would be super useful.
Thank you.
I think they cover most of it, but I think where I see the future, I think it's going to be commonplace, right? It's going to be embedded in everything the companies do, and the same way we need to do the financial reporting, we need to change our processes to be able to capture the data in a way that I can then do my reporting. I think this is going to be, if it's in 2 years, if it's in 20 years, I'd say it's going to be quicker than we think because the companies are already acting on it, but we're going to see more and more embedded. And I'd say in terms of how it can help your students, it's I think understanding the business value of what we're talking about here, right? We still see a lot of which is a good thing, right? A lot of passion because of the climate and want to have leave a better world for the next generation. But we are now in a point that there's very clear business value. There's very clear differentiation between companies that are investing in this space versus not. As with anything, the money is going to end up driving the actions in this space, and your students understanding that definitely will help.
I mean, definitely what we measure is what we treasure, and mismeasurement can lead to misallocation of capital in society. I want to thank you all for being with us. And I don't know if we have any time for questions. We're out of time. Thank you very much.